Hello everyone. Before we get started, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. That way, YouTube knows to keep sharing more stories like this with you. Now, let's jump in. I bought the drone a few weeks before that summer. One of those mid-range ones with a built-in camera and a decent range. I'd been watching videos of people flying them over fields and woods, and since my family still owned that old piece of land on the edge of Lancaster, I figured it'd be a perfect place to test it out. The cornfield was huge, 40 acres, maybe more, flat land that used to belong to my grandfather. We hadn't farmed it for years. Someone else leased it, so the crops weren't ours, but it was still familiar ground. That night, I parked my truck along the dirt path that led to the north edge of the field. The sun was dropping low, turning everything that deep orange color you only get in July, when the air feels heavy and full of bugs. The corn was tall, well above my head, and the rows were packed tight. You couldn't really walk through them without forcing your way. I stayed by the truck and got the drone ready, checking the propellers, camera feed, and GPS on my phone. The live video was crisp, and the small hum of the rotors faded as it lifted higher. I let it hover for a bit, watching the field spread out below in long, perfect lines that glowed gold and orange in the dying light. I felt proud, actually. The feed looked cinematic, almost peaceful. About 2 minutes in, I started flying it further toward the center of the field, following the neat rows. Then something caught my eye. There was a narrow path cutting between the stalks. Not a tractor line, not one of the normal service rows. It was thin, almost like something had been walking through there, flattening just enough corn to leave a trail. It wasn't supposed to be there. Thought maybe it was where a deer had gone through, but it seemed too straight for that. Too intentional. I decided to follow it. The drone dipped lower, skimming just above the tassels as I traced the narrow opening. The path went on for maybe 100 feet, and then in the middle of it, I saw something that made me stop moving the controls entirely. There was someone sitting in the dirt, cross-legged right in the middle of the row. The figure was still, too still. I thought at first it might be a scarecrow or maybe some kind of dummy. But then the drone's microphone picked up a sound. A faint humming. It was rhythmic, like someone quietly humming to themselves. I didn't move for a few seconds, just watched through the feed. The person's head was slightly bowed, their shoulders moving slowly with each breath. The sun was nearly gone, but there was just enough light to see that their clothes were dark and dusty. I dropped the drone lower, maybe 20 feet above them. The noise grew a little clearer, definitely human. Then all at once the person stopped humming. Their head turned upward, slow but deliberate, and they looked straight into the drone's camera. Their face was smeared completely with mud, except for their eyes. Bright wide eyes that caught the reflection of the last bit of sunset. I jerked the controls and pulled the drone up fast. My hands were shaking. The live feed went blurry for a second as the camera struggled to refocus. When it did, I could see nothing but corn again. The path was still there, but the figure was gone. The space where they'd been sitting was just a flattened patch of dirt and stalks. I brought the drone back fast, my heart pounding. I remember standing there in the humid air, sweat running down my neck, trying to convince myself it had just been a weird shadow, or maybe some old mannequin someone dumped. But I knew what I saw. The eyes weren't fake. I landed the drone beside my truck, packed it into its case, and got out of there before it got dark. The whole drive home, I kept glancing in the mirrors, expecting to see someone standing by the road. For the next few days, I didn't go back. I replayed the footage a few times, but it was grainy once the light dropped. You could still make out the shape of the person, though, and that moment where their head turned up toward the camera. Every time I watched it, it made my stomach tighten. I thought about reporting it to the guy who leased the field, but what would I even say? That someone covered in mud was sitting in his corn at sunset? It sounded crazy. 3 days later, I finally decided to check it out in person. I went in the morning, around 9, when the light was bright and the air still felt fresh. I drove out the same way, parked in the same spot, and this time I took a machete to push through the stalks. I used the GPS coordinates from the drone feed to find the path. It was still there, narrow, the stalks bent and broken in the same line I'd seen from above. I followed it slowly, the dry leaves brushing against my arms and the sound of insects buzzing all around. It felt like the air got heavier the deeper I went, the smell of soil and corn stronger. When I reached the spot where the figure had been, I stopped. There was no one there, no footprints, no sign of anyone sitting, but the dirt looked disturbed, as if something had been pressed into it and then lifted away. What caught my attention most was a pile in the center of the clearing, a small heap of corn husks, shaped roughly like a body lying on its back. Not just tossed together, arranged. The outline was strange. The arms and legs were distinct, almost deliberate, as if someone had taken the time to make it look human. I crouched down and stared at it for a while. The husks were dry and brittle, but the dirt beneath them was darker than the rest, damp like it had just been turned over. I remember feeling a wave of unease I couldn't shake. The air around me was silent. No wind, no birds, just the faint rustle of corn somewhere far off. I backed away slowly and left the same way I came. That night I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went over every logical explanation I could. Maybe some local kids had been messing around, making shapes in the field. Maybe someone homeless had been sleeping out there. But who sits cross-legged at dusk covered in mud, humming to themselves? And why disappear the second I moved the drone? Few days later, I went back again, just before sunset, this time leaving the drone in the truck. I stood at the edge of the field, staring down those endless rows. The path was still there, but it looked wider, as if more stalks had been pushed aside. I didn't follow it that time. I just stood there listening. Somewhere in the distance, faint and drawn out, I thought I heard humming again. It was soft and low, blending with the sound of insects. I turned back, got in the truck, and left before it got dark. The next week, when I flew the drone again, the path was gone. Completely overgrown, as if it had never been there. But the footage from that first night stayed on my phone. Sometimes I rewatch it. The image is blurry and the sound distorted. But right before the drone shoots upward, you can still see those eyes, bright and locked right on the camera, like whoever was out there knew exactly where I was standing. It was late afternoon when I pulled off County Road 211, somewhere between Springer and Maxwell in Colfax County. The sun was dropping low, the air warm and dry, and the wind made that hollow rustling sound through the corn. It was early May, and the fields were already knee-high with fresh green stalks. I was hauling a delivery of seed for a client, just a quick drop. I parked my truck off the dirt road by the edge of the cornfield, left it running with the AC on low, and went to meet the guy near the shed about 100 yards away. 10 minutes, maybe less, I was gone. When I came back, the truck wasn't where I left it. For a second, I just stood there staring at the empty patch of dirt, thinking maybe I parked farther down than I remembered. But I hadn't. My tire tracks were right there, cutting in from the road and ending in nothing. The sound of the wind in the corn got louder the longer I stood there. At first, I thought maybe the client, or one of his workers, had moved it as a joke. Farmers around here can be like that. Dry humor, harmless pranks. I looked down the dirt road both ways. Nothing but open fields and distant fences. The only sound was the steady hiss of wind and the soft rattle of the leaves. I pulled my phone from my pocket and called my boss. Told him the truck was gone. He thought I was screwing around and said he'd head over. I stayed put, feeling the sun dip lower, the air starting to cool, the sky going pale orange over the fields. While I waited, I caught a flash of light through the corn. Red, faint, but unmistakable. My taillights. Deep inside the rows, maybe 200 or 300 yards in. They flickered twice like the brake lights were tapped, then went still. It made no sense. No vehicle could fit easily through the rows. Corn was planted tight this year. Barely enough room for a four-wheeler. I started walking toward the light, pushing through the dry leaves, the soil soft under my boots. The sound of the stalks brushing against my jeans was loud in my ears. I kept my eyes on where I'd seen the red glow, but after a few seconds it vanished. I called out, "Nothing." The only thing moving was the wind. I kept going, jogging now, rows stretching endlessly in every direction. Every few feet I'd think I saw movement, maybe a shape, but it was always just the plants swaying. After what felt like 10 minutes of weaving through the field, I found it. My truck was sitting sideways between the rows, like someone had forced it in, scraping the mirrors against the stalks. The driver's door was open, engine off, keys still in the ignition. The ground around it was torn up, deep tire ruts gouged into the dirt. I stood there, catching my breath, staring at it. The smell of exhaust still hung faintly in the air, meaning whoever did this had been there just moments before I arrived. The sun had almost set now, and the shadows between the corn were turning dark. I looked around, half expecting to see someone crouched nearby. Nothing, just that endless pattern of green rows fading into dusk. I checked the cab. Everything looked normal. My wallet was still in the console. The dash cam light was blinking red. The seat was pushed all the way back though, farther than I ever had it, like someone tall had been driving. I felt a weird chill crawl through me, even though the air was still warm. When my boss finally arrived, he called the sheriff. They came out just after dark, their flashlights cutting across the corn. I stood by the truck as they looked around. The sheriff asked if I'd touched anything since I found it. I said no. They scanned the ground with their beams and found something I hadn't noticed. Footprints in the dirt. Barefoot. You could see the toes clearly pressed into the soft soil. Big ones. At least a size 13, maybe 14. They led from one of the corn rows straight up to the truck's driver's side door. But after that, nothing. No tracks leading away. They spread out for nearly an hour searching. But there was nothing beyond that single set. No drag marks, no partial prints, no tire tracks from another vehicle. Just those bare feet, and the disturbed earth where the truck had been forced through the corn. Back at the station later, the sheriff had me sit while they copied the dash cam footage. I hadn't watched it yet. I remember sitting there under the buzzing fluorescent lights, the smell of dust and coffee heavy in the air, feeling this uneasy pressure in my chest. When they finally played the video, it started like any normal recording. I could see myself parking at the field's edge, getting out, walking off toward the shed. The truck idled for a bit, nothing unusual. Then, about 2 minutes after I disappeared from frame, movement flickered on the passenger side. Something stepped out of the corn. It wasn't running or sneaking. It just walked out like it belonged there. A man tall, barefoot, wearing dirty jeans and no shirt. His skin was pale and dusty, like he'd been sleeping in the dirt. He crouched by the door for several seconds, looking around, then stood up and slowly opened it. He didn't hesitate. Just climbed in, shifted in the seat, turned the wheel, and drove forward, straight into the corn. The whole thing lasted maybe 15 seconds. There was something about the way he moved that stuck with me. No rush, no panic, like he knew exactly what he was doing. When the sheriff paused the video, I could see his feet clearly on the pedals, bare, cracked, covered in mud. They dusted the truck for prints and took samples from the handles. Nothing came back. They ran the size, the stride length, everything. No matches to anyone in the area. The sheriff figured it was probably some drifter living rough out by the tracks or in the arroyos. It happens around here. People wander in off the highway, trying to survive off scraps, sometimes losing their minds from heat or dehydration. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But what didn't make sense were the tracks. The ground was soft, freshly watered from irrigation, and there were clear prints walking up, then nothing leaving. Not a single smudge, not even a crushed stalk in the direction he might have gone. I went back out there the next morning with one of the deputies just to see for myself. The corn was still, the air already hot and dry. My tire marks were there, the footprints too, exactly where they'd been. But past that, the soil was untouched. Not even the wind had disturbed it. I still deliver out that way sometimes, but I never stop near that field again. Every time I pass it, I slow down just a little and glance toward the rows. There's this narrow section near the middle where the plants grow uneven. almost like something heavy pushed through once and never grew back right. The sheriff closed the case as trespassing, nothing more. But I kept the dash cam clip. I don't know why. Maybe to remind myself it actually happened. Sometimes late at night I'll watch that 15-second clip. The man stepping out of the corn, crouching by my door, the way he looks around before sliding in. There's one frame just before he turns the key, where he glances toward the camera. Eyes dark, face calm, mouth set like he's about to speak. And even though I've seen it 100 times, I still can't shake the feeling that he wasn't just passing through. He looked too sure of what he was doing, like he'd been waiting for that truck, waiting for me to walk away. It was November 2015 in Plainview, Texas, right after the harvest season. My uncle had this old tradition of burning off the leftover corn stalks after the fields were cleared. He said it was good for the soil and kept pests down. That year, the air was dry and the night felt colder than usual. You could smell that sharp mix of ash and dirt every time the wind shifted. The fire stretched across several acres, a wide orange line crawling over the ground, hissing and crackling. The sky was empty except for the smoke drifting up and blotting out the stars. I stayed to help that night, keeping watch on the perimeter while my uncle handled the fire lines. He didn't trust it to burn unattended. Out here, one bad gust and you could lose half your property. The field sat about 3 miles out from town, surrounded by open land and a thin stretch of fence line. No houses, no lights, just the glow of the fire and the sound of the wind scraping through the stalks. Around midnight, the flames had settled into a low burn, and the smoke started to spread along the ground like a fog. I remember thinking how strange it looked, how the heat from the fire made the air shimmer, even though the cold night pressed in from all sides. That's when I noticed something moving. At first, it was just a shape, a darker patch shifting in the smoke. I thought maybe a coyote or a stray dog had wandered close, drawn by the light or the smell. But then it stood up. The way it moved, slow, jerky, like it was learning how to balance, it didn't make sense. It was roughly human height, maybe a little taller, but too thin, too uneven. Its arms didn't swing naturally. They hung stiff like something was wrong with its joints. I froze for a second, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. The smoke made everything look distorted. I remember blinking hard, thinking it might just be the heat or exhaustion. But it was still there. It wasn't walking away from the fire. It was walking straight toward it. The figure didn't react to the smoke or heat. It didn't even raise a hand to shield its face. It just kept coming until it stopped a few feet from the flames. It crouched down like it was inspecting something on the ground. I could hear the fire popping, the hiss of sap burning off the stalks. My uncle and I both started toward it, our flashlights cutting through the haze. When we got closer, there was nothing. Just a patch of ash and burned soil. No footprints, no sign of movement, no heat ripples where someone might have been. It was as if whatever we saw had just dissolved into the smoke. We searched that area for almost half an hour, sweeping the lights back and forth, checking for shoe prints, animal tracks, anything. But the ground was soft and covered in fine ash, perfect for holding prints, and it was completely smooth. Not even a scuff mark. The smoke drifted around us, making my eyes water, and I remember the silence. Even the crickets had gone quiet. My uncle just said we should finish up and get home, and I didn't argue. Neither of us mentioned what we saw again that night. The next morning we came back to check the field once everything had cooled down. The air still smelled like burnt corn and dirt. There was this strange quiet, like the land hadn't settled yet after the burn. I walked the same perimeter, same spot where we'd seen the figure, and there it was, a small pile of clothes sitting right where the figure had crouched. Jeans, a flannel shirt, socks, a belt. They were all burned, blackened around the edges. But the buttons and belt buckle were spotless, shiny like they'd been polished. My uncle didn't touch anything. He just stared at it, then called the sheriff. When the sheriff showed up, he took one look and said it looked like the clothes had been boiled clean. That was the phrase he used. He said maybe someone dumped them there earlier, and the fire just burned around them. But that didn't make sense. We'd been standing there the whole night. Nobody came through that field except us. The sheriff asked if we'd found any bones or teeth in the ash, but there wasn't a single trace of anything human. Just that neat little pile, half buried in soot. He took a few photos and said he'd file it as debris from the burn. For weeks after that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The way the figure moved, how it seemed confused but determined, like it didn't know where it was going but couldn't stop walking. I even thought about checking missing person reports, but I knew that would just make things worse in my head. Every time I drove past that field, I'd look out and see the faint black scar where the fire had been, and it always made my stomach twist. The ground there looked different afterward, like the soil refused to grow anything. My uncle tried replanting the next spring, but nothing came up. Not a single sprout. He said the soil must have gone bad from the heat, but I don't think that was it. The rest of the field was fine, just that one area stayed bare. By summer, the burned spot was still there, a perfect circle of dead earth surrounded by waist-high grass. The clothes had been taken for evidence, but you could still see the faint imprint of where they'd been. I remember one day walking out there again, crouching down to look at the soil. It was hard, crusted over and smooth, almost like glass in some spots. When I touched it, it was warm, warmer than the rest of the ground, even though the sun had just started rising. That feeling, that faint warmth, made my hand jerk back. It didn't feel right, like the ground itself hadn't cooled all the way. That year, my uncle decided not to plant in that section again. He said it wasn't worth the effort, that the soil needed time to heal. But he never burned another field after that. He'd just till under the stalks, leave the rest to rot. He said he didn't trust what came out of that smoke anymore, and I understood. I never told anyone else what we saw, not exactly. It was easier to let people think it was just a trick of the fire, a shadow. But I know what I saw. It wasn't an illusion. It wasn't a coyote or some drunk wandering through the field. It was something human-shaped, standing upright, walking straight into the flames without flinching. Years later, when I visit, that patch of land is still bare. The weeds stop right at its edge like they know better. When the wind blows, the ash still stirs there, even though the rest of the soil stays still. Sometimes in late November, when the air gets cold again and the sky turns gray, I swear I can still smell that same faint scent of burned earth drifting from that side of the property. My uncle never goes near it anymore, and neither do I. The land remembers things, I think. And some places, no matter how much you try to forget, don't let go of what they've seen. It was the second week of October 2013, and the air in Pawnee had that damp, heavy chill that seeps through denim. I was 16, working nights for Old Man Riker, helping with the corn harvest. His field stretched farther than I could see under the moonlight, a pale ocean of dry stalks whispering in the wind. He didn't pay much, but he paid cash, and I needed it. That night, we'd been running the combine since sundown, the engines hum steady and comforting in the empty dark. The smell of diesel mixed with dust and cut corn hung thick in the air, coating my tongue every time I swallowed. Around 1 in the morning, the combine sputtered, coughed, and died. Riker cursed under his breath and climbed down, waving me over. The thing had thrown a belt or something. He told me to go fetch the toolbox from the barn. The barn wasn't close, maybe half a mile across open field, and the flashlight he normally kept in the cab was dead. He told me to hurry, said the moon was bright enough. He wasn't wrong. The sky was cloudless, the moon sharp and white, throwing the rows into long, clean shadows. You could see well enough if your eyes adjusted. Still, the idea of walking alone through all that field in the middle of the night wasn't exactly pleasant. The air felt still once I left the combine behind. The engine noise had covered everything before. Now it was just the dry hiss of corn leaves rubbing together. My boots crunched through the stubble. The barn light on the far side of the field was faint, a single yellow bulb in the distance. I focused on it and tried not to think about how isolated it felt out there. You could walk 50 feet into that corn and vanish from the world. No one would see you, not even from 10 yards away. Just endless rows taller than your head, rustling softly like something breathing. I was halfway through when I heard it. A metallic sound, light at first like something tapping or clinking. I stopped walking, thinking maybe Riker had gotten the machine running again. But it wasn't the rhythmic growl of an engine. It was slow, uneven. Clink, scrape, clink. It sounded like metal dragging against metal, like someone pulling a length of chain across a truck bed. The wind had died completely. I could hear my own breathing. When I stopped moving, the sound stopped too. I waited, listening. Nothing. Just silence stretching across the field. I shifted the toolbox to my other hand and started walking again, slower this time. A few steps in, the sound started again, closer now. Definitely not from the direction of the combine. It was coming from somewhere behind me, between the rows. Clink, clink. Then a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled through the dirt. I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I meant it to. Riker? Nothing. Just the sound cutting off again. I felt my heart hammering in my chest. I turned, trying to see between the stalks, but the rows were too thick. The moonlight caught the edges of the dry leaves, but nothing else moved. I took another step backward, every nerve in my body tight. Then something brushed against my jeans, just the faintest touch at my calf, like a piece of stalk bending. But it wasn't a stalk. It moved against me, deliberate. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped the tools. That's when I saw it. Not a full figure, just a glimpse between the rows. Someone crawling. Low to the ground, moving fast, trying to stay out of sight. The dry leaves rattled as they went by. My stomach flipped. I didn't think. I just dropped the toolbox and ran. The metal clattered against the dirt as I sprinted straight down the row, tearing through leaves and stalks that slapped against my face and arms. I didn't care which direction I was going anymore. I just wanted out. I could hear something moving behind me, the leaves shaking, the sound of dirt kicking up. Every few seconds, I thought I heard the faint jingle of metal again, like a chain being dragged or hitting the ground. My breath burned in my throat. The moonlight kept shifting through the stalks, flashes of silver cutting through black. I could barely see, but I didn't stop. I crashed through the last few rows and stumbled out onto the gravel road, nearly falling to my knees. I turned and looked back. The corn swayed gently in the breeze, perfectly still otherwise. Nothing came out after me. No sound, no movement. Just the wind picking up again like it had been holding its breath. I stood there for a long minute, bent over, gasping, waiting for something, anything, to show itself. But the field looked as empty as it always did. Eventually, I made my way back to the barn, shaking so bad I dropped the spare belt twice before I got it in my hands. When Riker came walking up from the other side of the field an hour later, I didn't tell him what I saw. I just said I couldn't find the tools. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the barn board sounded like someone crawling under them. The next morning, when the sun was finally up and the fog lifted off the field, Riker told me to ride out with him to look for the toolbox. We followed the tracks I'd left through the rows, broken stalks, my boot prints deep in the dirt from running. About halfway through, we found the box tipped over, wrenches scattered in the mud. A few feet away there were other prints, not boots. Bare feet deep enough to show toes. Some were half dragged, like the person had been pulling something heavy behind them. The dirt was scored with long grooves, and in one of them, lying half buried, was a broken piece of chain. Rusted, maybe 2 feet long, snapped clean in the middle like it had been yanked apart. We followed the tracks farther, through a part of the field Riker hadn't cut yet, and came to a small clearing in the center. The corn had been flattened there, almost like a nest. In the middle was a makeshift lean-to built from stalks and old feed sacks. Inside were a few empty cans, a filthy blanket, and the rest of that chain. Whoever had been living there had been out in that field a while. Long enough to build shelter, long enough to hide in plain sight every night while we worked just yards away. Riker called the sheriff. They came out, took pictures, bagged the chain, looked around, said it was probably some drifter, Maybe someone who'd been camping on farmland for months without anyone knowing. They found old fire pits along the tree line later that week. Nobody ever came forward. Nobody got caught. The sheriff told Riker to keep an eye out and to lock his equipment. I kept working for Riker that fall, but I never crossed that field alone again. Even in daylight, when the wind blew through those stalks, I could hear the faint rattle of something metal. It sounded like a chain being dragged through dirt, far off but steady, as if it had never really stopped that night. It was August of 2009, and Tipton, Indiana was as flat and humid as it always was that time of year. The town's annual Harvest Fun Days was going on, a mix of carnival games, tractor rides, and a corn maze run by the local 4-H club. I was volunteering that evening, helping with parking earlier in the day, and then moving over to the ticket booth as the sun started to drop behind the fields. The air smelled like grilled hot dogs and diesel, and you could hear laughter from the maze, country songs from the loudspeakers, and the low hum of generators behind the tents. By around 7:30, the light had started turning that deep gold color that hits just before dusk. A lot of families were coming out of the maze, kids holding flashlights, faces red from the heat, parents carrying water bottles and glow sticks. It felt normal, easy, the kind of small-town event where nothing bad ever happens. Then maybe a little after 8, a woman came running up to the booth screaming. Her voice cut through the music and chatter instantly. She was saying she couldn't find her son. At first I thought maybe she'd lost him near the food stands or parking area, but she was pointing back toward the maze, crying so hard she could barely talk. The manager called for the sheriff's office right away, but we didn't wait. A few of us grabbed flashlights and went into the maze to start looking. The stalks were still thick that time of year, tall enough that you couldn't see over them, and when the wind moved through, it made this soft rustling sound that carried in every direction. It was a small maze, maybe 4 acres total, with a few main trails and some dead ends, but it felt endless once you were inside it at night. The air was sticky and mosquitoes were out in swarms. We kept calling the boy's name, walking down each path, shining our lights across the leaves and dirt. Someone found his shoe first, near a fork in the main trail. It was small, a blue sneaker with a cartoon logo on it. A few feet away was his flashlight still on. The beam pointed toward the ground. There were clear little footprints in the dirt there, small ones moving down the main path like he'd been running or walking fast. We followed them for a while until they just stopped. Not faded, not turned, just stopped mid-stride. I remember crouching down and brushing the dirt with my hand, thinking maybe the soil had been disturbed, or someone had covered the rest of the tracks, but there was nothing. The ground was dry and smooth. By then, deputies had arrived and more volunteers joined in. They had us split up into small groups to grid search the area. I was in the group that took the south side, moving row by row through the corn. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. The sound of the generators and the music faded, and all you could hear was the crunch of our shoes and the faint hiss of bugs. The flashlight beams made the corn look like walls, and the light bounced back off the dry husks, giving everything a washed-out color. We were maybe 15 minutes into that search when the guy walking ahead of me suddenly stopped. His light was fixed on something a few rows in. At first I thought it was just another scarecrow prop. They had a few scattered around the maze for decoration. But then I noticed how still he was. He didn't move or say anything. When I came up beside him and saw what he was looking at, my stomach just dropped. The boy was sitting there, 3 rows deep into the corn, like someone had set him down gently. His legs were crossed, hands in his lap, head tilted slightly forward. His eyes were open, staring at the dirt. His mouth was full of soil, packed tight like he'd tried to eat it or like someone had forced it in there. There were no scratches, no torn clothes, no bruises that I could see. He looked untouched, just wrong. The flashlight light made his face pale, almost gray, and the shadows from the stalks flickered over him every time the wind moved. We called for the deputies, and they pushed us back right away. The rest of the night became a blur of flashing lights, radios, and hushed voices. They taped off the entire maze, pushed everyone toward the parking area, and told the families to go home. The mother was screaming somewhere near the entrance, and I remember one deputy walking her away, while another threw a tarp over the row where the boy had been. They kept everyone who had been part of the search until after midnight, asking questions, taking names. Nobody had seen anything. Nobody had heard a scream, a struggle, or even footsteps that didn't belong. The deputies used spotlights to search the maze again and again, but they didn't find any sign of another person. No other footprints, no drag marks, no broken stalks that suggested someone had carried him. Just the boy's small tracks that ended mid-stride in the place he'd been found sitting. The sheriff's office released almost nothing after that. They ruled out an animal attack immediately, said it didn't match anything like that. Some people in town whispered about cults. Others said maybe he suffocated accidentally. But none of that made sense. How does a child walk into the middle of a maze, stop walking, and end up sitting 3 rows deep with dirt stuffed into his mouth without anyone seeing or hearing a thing? A week later, the maze was closed for good. The owners plowed the corn down early that year. I remember driving past the field one evening in September. It was just dirt by then, flat and bare. Nothing left of the paths we'd searched. They canceled the festival the next year and never brought it back. Months later, I ran into one of the deputies who had been on scene that night. He didn't say much, just that it was the worst thing he'd seen in his career. Then he mentioned, almost under his breath, that what haunted him most wasn't the boy, but the prints. He said there were no adult footprints anywhere, not even overlapping the boy's, just those small ones, ending mid-step like he'd simply stopped existing for a moment, and then been placed where they found him. For a long time after that, I couldn't walk near a cornfield without feeling uneasy. In late summer, when the stalks are high and the air is thick, there's this quiet that settles between the rows, a stillness that doesn't feel natural. You can hear your own breathing, your heartbeat, the faint crackle of dry leaves brushing together. Every time I pass one now, I think of that night, of the shoe on the path, the flashlight still glowing in the dirt, and that small, perfect row where the footprints ended. And I wonder if anyone will ever really understand what happened in that field in Tipton, or if it's one of those things that just isn't meant to make sense. It was early September, just past midnight, and I was heading home from a long shift at the co-op in Spencer. I'd been stacking feed bags and sweeping the warehouse since the afternoon, and by the time I clocked out, my shoulders felt like they'd been beaten with hammers. The air was cool, but still had that faint smell of dust and fertilizer that never really left the county roads. My drive home usually took about 30 minutes if I cut across County Road M27, the one that passed between 2 big cornfields owned by the Jensen family. Most folks avoided that route at night because it was narrow and had no shoulder, but it saved me nearly 10 minutes, and I'd driven it enough times to know every bend and mailbox by memory. The sky was clear that night, a pale half-moon hanging low above the fields, and my old Ford's headlights stretched out just far enough to light up the edges of the road. The corn was tall that time of year, taller than I was by at least a couple feet, dry and whispering against itself every time the wind moved. The sound always reminded me of paper rustling. My radio barely picked up anything out there, so it was just the hum of the engine and that faint hiss of wind pushing through the stalks. About halfway down the stretch, maybe 2 miles past the last farmhouse, my headlights picked up movement. At first, I thought it was just the shadow of a scarecrow or one of those reflective irrigation pipes catching the light. But as I got closer, I realized it was a person. Someone standing between the corn rows right where the edge of my light faded into darkness. He wasn't moving, not walking or waving, just standing there with his head tilted a little to one side, like he was listening to something or maybe just watching. I slowed down, my foot easing off the gas. I thought maybe it was a farmer checking his field or a kid screwing around after a night of drinking. But even then, something about the way he stood there didn't sit right. He didn't shift his weight or raise his hands against the lights like most people would. He just stood there, straight and still, like he didn't care that a truck was coming straight toward him. When my headlights finally hit him full on, he turned in this stiff, almost mechanical way, not quick, just deliberate, and stepped backward into the corn. No sound, no reaction. Just vanished between the rows like the stalks had swallowed him whole. I rolled another 10 feet before stopping in the middle of the road. The engine idled low, ticking softly under the hood. I sat there for a few seconds, staring at the gap in the corn where he'd gone in. The rows shifted gently in the breeze, catching flashes of moonlight, but I couldn't see anything beyond that. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box and stepped out. The air outside was cooler than I expected, and the smell of the dry corn was strong, almost sharp. I shined the light toward the rows. The beam cut through a few stalks, lighting up bits of brown leaves and cracked husks, but nothing else. No footprints, no sound except the faint brushing of the plants rubbing against each other. Then I heard it. A whistle. Soft and slow, coming from somewhere deeper in the corn. 4 notes, drawn out and familiar. It was the same tune my dad used to whistle for our old dog, Jake, when I was a kid. I hadn't heard it in years, but I knew it the second it reached me. It came again, just as slow, maybe 50 feet inside the rows. I stood there for a few seconds, light trembling slightly in my hand. I told myself it had to be a coincidence. Maybe some drifter, maybe even a local who happened to know the tune. But something about hearing it there in the middle of nowhere made the hair on my neck stand up. The whistle stopped, replaced again by the dry, shifting sound of corn moving against itself. That was enough for me. I got back in the truck, shut the door, and just sat there for a moment, staring out the windshield. The moonlight hit the corn at an angle that made it look like it was rippling, like something was moving under it. I put the truck in drive and eased forward, keeping my eyes on the mirror until the fields finally gave way to open pasture, and the road widened again. I didn't see another car the rest of the way home. When I got back, I parked in the driveway, killed the engine, and just sat in silence. My heart was still beating faster than normal, and I couldn't shake that image of the man standing there. The way he turned, that small tilt of his head and that damn whistle. I didn't tell anyone about it that night. I figured it was just some hitchhiker or someone drunk wandering back to town. The next morning when I drove to work, that road was blocked off. A county deputy had his truck parked sideways across it, lights flashing. I slowed down and rolled my window halfway, but before I could ask, another car turned around ahead of me, so I did the same. That evening, word had already spread. They said the sheriff's office found a missing hitchhiker's shoes and a half-buried duffel bag right where I'd seen the man. The bag was torn open, clothes half pulled out like someone had been going through it or trying to hide it. They figured he'd been trying to camp near the edge of the field, maybe walking toward Spencer before something happened. No one saw him again after that. For a few nights after, I kept thinking about that whistle. I didn't even realize I'd been humming it to myself at work until a coworker mentioned it. I stopped taking that road completely after that, started adding 10 minutes to my drive, cutting through the main highway instead. A week later, the sheriff's office released a short statement, said they couldn't confirm if the items belonged to the missing man, only that they'd been found near where another driver reported seeing a possible pedestrian that same night. They didn't mention anything else, no signs of struggle, no tracks, just that. Every fall since then, when the corn turns brown and the wind starts running through the fields again, I catch myself thinking about that night. I picture that figure, the stillness of him, the way he slipped backward into the rows like he belonged there. And every now and then, driving home late, if I crack my window and the air is still enough, I swear I can almost hear that slow, 4-note whistle carried on the wind, soft and fading, somewhere out among the dry stalks. I never stopped to check anymore. It was June 2017, Garden City, Kansas. I was working the night shift for an irrigation company, driving from pivot to pivot across the endless flat farmland. My route covered about 20 miles of cornfields, each pivot marked by a tall metal arm with a pump at the center that kept the crops alive through the dry summer. The job wasn't hard, just lonely. I'd check the water pressure, write down the numbers, listen for leaks, and move on. Nights like that blurred together. Same dirt roads, same diesel hum, same heavy smell of wet soil and fertilizer. That night was warm and windless. The air felt thick, holding every sound in it. I started my shift around midnight, making good time down the gravel roads. My truck's headlights swept across the rows of corn that stood taller than me, tight and uniform, like walls closing in. Around 2 a.m. I pulled up to pivot number 6 near the end of County Road 19. The sky was hazy, the moon faint behind it. The motor of the pump hummed steadily, the only thing breaking the silence. I parked, stepped out with my clipboard, and started checking the gauges like usual. Everything looked fine. Pressure normal, no leaks, flow consistent. I was writing the readings when I caught a faint sound over the motor. It took me a second to realize what it was, a cough. Not a big one, but soft, like someone trying not to draw attention. Came from somewhere in the corn, maybe 20 or 30 feet from the pump. I froze, listening hard. Then I heard it again. 2 short coughs, then quiet. It was close enough that I could tell it was human. I thought maybe it was a farmhand or a transient who'd wandered off the road. Maybe someone trying to rest or sleep between the rows. Sometimes you'd get people cutting across fields at night, but not often. Still, I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I meant it to. There was no response, just the steady whir of the pump. I waited a few seconds, then walked around the motor, sweeping my flashlight over the ground. That's when I saw it. A jacket hanging neatly on the fence post beside the pump. It was dark blue, like something a worker would wear. The weird thing was, it looked clean, not dusty, not damp from the night air. I touched it, and it was warm, like someone had just taken it off a few minutes earlier. That made my stomach turn a little. Out there, at that hour, the only heat came from engines or people. I turned off the pump motor so I could hear better. The field went quiet, except for the faint ticking of the metal cooling. Then nothing, not even crickets. For a few seconds, it was dead silent. Then I heard it. The corn moving just a few feet away, like something large was pushing between the stalks. It wasn't the wind. It was too deliberate, too heavy. I stepped back fast, raising my light toward the sound. For half a second, the beam caught a shape. Something tall, taller than a normal man, moving fast between the rows. Couldn't make out details. Just a long, dark figure with long strides heading away from the pump. My first thought was a guy running. Maybe trying to avoid me, but the way it moved was strange. It didn't stumble or break pace, just cut straight through the corn like it knew exactly where it was going. I yelled, but it didn't stop. I ran after it, the light bouncing over the stalks, but within seconds it was gone. Just the sound of rustling fading into nothing. I stood there, breathing hard, my boots sinking into the damp soil. The rows were so tight I couldn't move quickly without getting hit in the face by leaves. The silence after it vanished felt worse than the sound itself. I walked back to the pump, heart still pounding, half expecting someone to be waiting there. But there was nothing. The jacket still hung on the post. I checked the ground for prints, but the soil was too dry and compact to hold anything clear. I logged the incident in my book, just possible trespasser, and called the on-duty sheriff. By the time he got there, it was close to 3. We walked the perimeter with flashlights, checked the fence lines, looked for tire marks on the dirt road. Nothing. It was like whoever or whatever it was had just disappeared into the field. The sheriff told me to keep my distance if it happened again and left. I didn't sleep much that morning. I couldn't stop thinking about that warm jacket and the way the corn had moved. A few of the other guys joked about it later, said it was probably a migrant worker hiding from patrols, or someone high wandering the fields. But I couldn't shake the image of how tall that figure had been, or how fast it moved. Over the next week, I avoided that pivot as long as I could, checking it only when I had to. Every time I went back, the fence post was empty, but I always looked twice, half expecting to see that jacket again. Nothing happened, though. Everything was normal until 2 weeks later. That night, I was running the north route 5 miles from pivot number 6 near the county line. It was around the same time, maybe 2 in the morning again. I was driving slow, headlights cutting through the dust hanging in the air, when I saw something hanging from the fence near pivot number 9. I stopped. My stomach dropped before I even got out of the truck. It was the same jacket, same dark blue color, same missing button on the cuff. It was clean again. No dirt, no rain marks like it had just been washed. It hung neatly over the fence post, sleeves draped down like arms. I touched it. It was warm. Warmer than it should have been in the middle of the night. I checked the ground, the road, even the pump controls. Everything else was perfectly normal. But the feeling that someone was watching me was stronger than ever. The corn stood still, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was in there just out of sight, waiting. I didn't hear coughing that time, but I thought I caught the faint sound of breathing, deep, steady, rhythmic, blending with the hum of the pump. I turned, scanned the rows with my light, but nothing moved. The corn just stood there, dark and heavy under the moonlight. After a few minutes, I got back in the truck and called it in. The sheriff came again, same as before, and we searched the area, but there was nothing. No prints, no trash, no tire marks, just the jacket hanging clean and warm. They took it with them that time, bagged it for evidence. No one claimed it, and nothing more ever came of it. I kept working that summer, but I never saw or heard anything like that again. Still, sometimes when I drove those back roads alone, I'd catch myself glancing toward the rows, half expecting to see something tall moving between them, out there at night, with the engines humming and the air so still you can hear your own heartbeat. You start to realize how easily something, or someone, could walk just a few feet away and you'd never even know. It happened in October 2012, just outside Fremont, Nebraska. The air had that kind of cold that made your breath hang like smoke and carried the smell of harvested corn and diesel from the tractors that worked the fields. My friend Melissa had taken up jogging around that time. She liked the quiet gravel roads north of town, said the air felt cleaner there, said it helped her clear her head after work. I never thought anything about it until that night. It was a Friday evening, just after 7. The sun had already dropped behind the horizon, leaving that deep blue light that fades fast into darkness. I was sitting in my room when I got a text from her. Guy keeps following me near the cornfield. Black hoodie. At first I thought she was joking. She used to mess with me like that sometimes. But then, a few seconds later, another text came in. He's closer now, I called her right away. She answered, breathing hard, her voice tight. I told her to get back to her car, just leave. She said she was cutting across the field to save time, that she could see the road from where she was. Then the line went dead. I tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. I grabbed my keys and got in my truck. The drive out there took maybe 10 minutes, though it felt longer. The roads were empty, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under my tires and the wind blowing across the open fields. The moon was out, thin and pale, just enough to make everything look washed out. When I turned down the service road where she usually parked, I saw her car right away, a silver Corolla, parked half off the shoulder with the driver's door hanging open. I pulled up behind it, left my headlights on. Her phone was on the seat, screen cracked, still lit up from the call. There was a half-empty water bottle in the cup holder, her keys still in the ignition, and her jacket folded in the back seat. It didn't look like she'd planned to be gone long. I started calling her name, first from the road, then a little louder when I didn't hear anything. My voice carried out into the cornfield, but all that came back was the rustling of dry stalks in the wind. I walked along the ditch with my flashlight, shining it across the field. The beam caught something about 40 yards in, a faint white glow like a reflection. I climbed over the small fence and walked toward it. It was her headlamp still on, lying in the dirt between rows of corn. The ground there was soft from rain a few days earlier, and I could see her footprints. Small, running prints spaced unevenly. She'd been moving fast, deeper into the field. I followed them for a while, maybe 30 or 40 feet before they just stopped. No more tracks ahead, no sign of her turning back. The dirt was flat after that, undisturbed as if she'd just vanished mid-stride. I remember standing there for a long time, shining my light in circles, trying to make sense of it. The stalks were tall enough to brush against my shoulders, and the sound of the wind moving through them made everything feel alive, like the field itself was breathing. I shouted her name again until my throat hurt, but there was nothing, just that constant whisper of leaves rubbing together. When the sheriff arrived, I was still out there, pacing in circles with my flashlight. They taped the area off and brought dogs, but the scent trail went cold right where her footprints ended. No sign of a struggle, no drag marks, nothing. They searched that whole area through the night, even brought drones the next morning. For days afterward, every time I drove by that road, her car was all I could think about. The door still open when I found it. The phone sitting there like she'd only stepped out for a second. A week later, she turned up 3 counties over, barefoot, clothes torn, walking along a service road near Columbus. A trucker spotted her around dawn and called it in. When I saw her in the hospital, she looked hollowed out like she hadn't slept or eaten in days. Her feet were torn up from walking, her skin scratched from briars. She couldn't remember much. The doctors said she was dehydrated and disoriented, but otherwise fine. All she said she remembered was running. Running through the corn, thinking someone was right behind her. She said she could hear whispering, not words, just breath and movement, always keeping pace with her steps. She didn't remember seeing anyone, just that feeling of being chased. She said it went on for what felt like hours, even though her GPS showed she only ran about half a mile before her signal disappeared. After that, she quit jogging. She moved to Omaha a few months later to live with her sister. I didn't blame her. The sheriff's office said they never found signs of foul play, just unexplained disappearance and recovery. No footprints other than hers. No tire tracks nearby except her own. For a long time, I kept thinking about those last few steps in the dirt, how they just stopped like that. I went back out there once, early in the morning after harvest season when the field was bare. You could see all the way to the tree line then. I stood in the same spot where her tracks had ended, trying to figure it out. The soil there was packed tight, flat and clean. If someone had come up behind her, there should have been something. Another set of prints, drag marks, anything. But there was nothing at all. The only thing that ever made sense to me was panic. Maybe she got so scared she ran blind through the field, fell, hit her head, and wandered for days without knowing where she was. The mind can do strange things when it's afraid. Maybe that whispering she heard was just the sound of wind moving through the corn, echoing in her head. Still, every fall when the corn turns dry and tall again, I think about her out there, that night sky, the cold wind, her flashlight lying in the dirt with the beam pointed straight up. Sometimes late at night when I drive past that road, I still slow down, looking out across the rows. The place feels wrong somehow, like the air holds its breath. Nothing ever grows quite the same there anymore. The ground stays uneven, like something underneath is waiting to shift again. And every October, when the wind picks up and moves through the fields, I swear you can hear that same whispering sound, soft, steady, matching your steps. It was August 2018, the last week of summer break, and the air in Monroe County felt thick with humidity. My cousin lived just outside town, where his backyard sloped down toward a long stretch of cornfield that seemed to go on forever. Every summer, we'd spend nights out there catching fireflies, running barefoot through the grass with jars in our hands until our parents called us in. It was one of those small, harmless summer traditions that never really lost its magic, even as we got older. That year, though, something about it felt different. The first thing I noticed was how many fireflies there were. Usually they'd blink on and off in small clusters, a few here and there above the grass, scattered like tiny green stars. But that August, The field behind my cousin's house was full of them. Hundreds, maybe thousands. When we stood on the back porch, it looked like the field itself was breathing light. They moved together in slow waves, blinking and fading, as if the whole field was alive. My cousin thought it was the warm weather, or maybe something in the soil that year. I didn't think much of it either. It was just strange enough to remember. One night near the end of the week, we went out later than usual. The sun had gone down and the air was still hot and buzzing with crickets. The porch light threw a yellow circle over the grass, and beyond that was only darkness and the faint, blinking light of the fireflies. We brought 2 glass jars and a butterfly net, the kind with a bent handle and a tear in the mesh. The grass was damp from dew, sticking to our legs as we walked. Somewhere far off you could hear a train moving through town, the low rumble echoing across the open fields. We ran around for a while, catching a few fireflies and letting them go again. The night was quiet except for our footsteps and the occasional click of the jar lid. After a while, I started noticing something odd. Some of the lights in the field weren't blinking. They stayed steady, bright, and low to the ground. At first, I thought maybe they were reflections from something metal, or maybe car lights on the highway. But the nearest road was half a mile away. Then I realized they were moving, slowly, side to side, almost like they were being carried. I stood still and squinted into the dark. The longer I looked, the clearer it became that these weren't fireflies at all. They were flashlights, at least 2 of them, moving in the corn just beyond the tree line. The light from them wasn't sweeping or jerky like someone playing around. It was deliberate, low, like they were searching for something. The movement was too smooth, too controlled to be random. My cousin was still chasing fireflies a few yards away when one of the lights turned off. Then another came on closer this time, and a shape stepped out of the corn. At first it was just a dark outline, tall, broad shoulders, wearing dark clothes. He wasn't holding the light up, just pointed it down at the ground, illuminating his boots and the stalks around him. A second man followed, same kind of build, same dark clothes. They stopped just at the edge of the field, not moving closer, not saying anything. The only sound was the faint buzz of insects and the blood rushing in my ears. I could see enough of their hands to tell they weren't holding tools or weapons, but something about how still they were made my stomach drop. They didn't look toward the house or at us, and they just stood there, flashlights pointed down, like whatever they were looking for wasn't us. Still, I couldn't make myself move for a few seconds. Then I grabbed my cousin by the arm and started pulling him back toward the porch. When we reached the yard light, I finally turned around. The 2 men were still there, standing at the edge of the corn. They hadn't followed. The lights from their flashlights glowed faintly on the ground, like they were marking a spot. Then one of them crouched, sweeping his beam along the dirt while the other stayed still. I watched until my cousin tugged on my sleeve, and we both went inside. We didn't tell anyone that night. I think part of us just didn't know what to make of it. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. The air was already warm and the cornfield hummed with grasshoppers. I walked down to where we'd seen the men, trying to convince myself it had just been hunters, or maybe someone camping. But when I got there, I saw the ground was torn up. Tire tracks cut deep into the soil, running right from the edge of the gravel drive into the field. The grass was flattened in a rough circle about the size of a car, maybe a little bigger, and there were crushed stalks all around. It looked like something had been parked there for a while, overnight at least. The dirt in the center of the flattened area was darker, like it had been dug up or burned. There were scraps of something, maybe plastic, maybe tarp, half buried in the mud. I felt the back of my neck prickle. There was no smell, no sign of trash or food wrappers, nothing that said camping, just tracks and a dented patch of earth. I went back and got my uncle, who called the sheriff. The deputy came out a few hours later, driving a white SUV with dust on the sides. He walked the area, took a few pictures, and said it looked like someone had been camping illegally or maybe dumping equipment. He mentioned something about vagrants who sometimes used the back roads. Nothing serious, he said. But when he looked at the tire marks, he frowned a little. He said they were deep for a car, more like a truck that had been sitting heavy. He marked it down, took some notes, and left. That was the end of it officially. No one came back, no one asked more questions. But for the rest of the summer, my cousin and I didn't go near that field again. When we sat on the porch at night, the fireflies were still there, thick as ever, blinking in the dark like a sea of little lights. But I couldn't look at them the same way. Every time I saw a bright, steady light among them, even for a second, my stomach twisted. By the time fall came, the fireflies were gone and the corn was harvested. The flattened patch disappeared with the rest of the stalks, leaving only dirt behind. Still, I never forgot how those men had stood there in silence, their flashlights aimed low, like they were searching for something they had lost and maybe found. We stopped catching fireflies after that. It didn't feel like a game anymore. The field was just a field, but every time I saw it, I thought about those steady lights and how easily they could have turned toward us.